In addition to being a shrewd analyst of American domestic politics, you're a considerable analyst of international politics as well. And in a very important book you wrote in 2001 called Special Providence, American Foreign Policy and How It Changed the World, you elaborate a fascinating typology of, I guess you'd say, schools of thought or schools of mind regarding Americans thinking about foreign policy. Tell us a little bit about these four habits of mind that you describe there.
Okay, well, I should say that the book kind of began as puzzled by two things that everybody who studied American foreign policy seemed to believe. And the one was that Americans just aren't very good at foreign policy. And people would have different reasons why we were so terrible. There's the Noam Chomsky school, there's the Henry Kissinger school, but everybody said we just stink at this game. But then the other thing is that all students of international relations agreed on was that the last 200 years had seen the steady rise of the United States in the international system. And nobody seemed troubled by this contradiction.
The incongruity,
yes, right. It just people just kind of sat with these two incompatible truths in their heads and just went through their day. So I was trying to figure out, how can this be? How can our foreign policy always look like it's a complete and total disaster waiting to happen, and yet somehow over time we may not get everything right, but we tend to do a little better than the competition. And what I sort of came down to was the idea that we have a model of what foreign policy should look like that's sort of based on 19th century European experience. You have the Metternich, the Bismarck in the tower, the brilliant genius who is playing a complicated game of chess with the genius in another tower across the way. And so you say, you put your pawn here because 3 moves later he'll put his knight there, and you've got him. That sort of thing. But also, you can't have domestic lobbies interfering with the genius at work. So you have sort of armed guards with bayonets keeping the sugar manufacturers and all these other people with their impertinent cries out of it, and you do pure foreign policy. American foreign policy has never looked like that. Maybe a couple of years when Kissinger was at his peak, but it didn't last. And you have to think, so how does it work? My sense is that we have a different way of thinking, asking ourselves, what is the national interest? Which is what foreign policy is really all about, is what is the national interest and how do you get there? Well, in the old system, or the European system, it's whatever Bismarck says it is. He's the genius, he figures it out. Right. But of course, and aside from being a genius, which he certainly was, he's also an East Elbian Prussian landowner, and he's a noble, so he has all of these other things. And so what often happens with those kinds of foreign policies is they look very brilliant for a long time till suddenly there's an explosion and turmoil. And ours almost always, Fisher Ames, one of the early congressmen, said, a republic is like a raft. It never sinks, but your feet are never out of the water. So American foreign policy is a little bit like that. And in this quest to figure out what the national interest is, it's like we have 4 different ideas about what kind of place America is, what we should be doing in the world, what the point of foreign policy is. And it's like they're constantly, it's like on our ship of state, these 4 schools are each trying to grab the wheel and steer it in their own direction. And I just, the most, in a way, easiest one to understand in some ways is what I call the Hamiltonian school, named for Alexander Hamilton.
You're kidding. That's so obvious.
It bothers foreigners because the others are all presidents.
Yes.
It's like, who is this Alexander Hamilton guy? But his idea was basically, he looked around the world, 1789, we got a new country, what are we going to do? What's our foreign policy going to look like? He says, well, what country on the planet has the most successful foreign policy? England. Yeah, we won in the revolution, but it was clearly kind of a fluke. We got lucky. So what should our foreign policy be? Well, we should look at the principles that guide England and adapt them to our own circumstances. And basically, right now, England is number one, and we can't challenge it, but if we simply bide our time and wait, the day will come when we will replace England as the world's dominant power, which of course happened, interestingly enough. But so what did England do? It was a sea power. It was a commercial power. It had a strong economy. The British government worked closely with large British corporations. So
I think we call that crony capitalism now.
well, when it's other people's corporations, when our own, I think when it's one of your own, it's far-sighted patriotism, I believe is the expression. So when President Obama complains to China that Google can't operate in China, this is an example of a Hamiltonian piece of foreign policy, and it's realist in the sense that it's not trying to turn the entire world into a Sunday school class, but it's also more optimistic than a lot of European foreign policy is very darkly realist in this, Thucydidean conflict is inevitable, peace is just a kind of a recess between two periods of war, powers will always fight. Hamiltonians think, well, it can be like that.
Yes.
But people are also greedy. And maybe you could build a system in which everybody was making enough money so that they would not necessarily go to war. So
it's not a zero-sum game.
exactly. So after World War II, we say to Germany and Japan, you can get rich in the system too. And you could have said, and some people did say at the time, look, this is crazy. You let Germany and Japan get rich, they're just going to build up huge militaries. They'll be back at your throats again. But the Hamiltonian calculation has usually been, look, we can lure them into the system. So that is one way of thinking about American
And the
foreign
Jeffersonian.
policy. Well, Jefferson hated Alexander Hamilton, and Jefferson saw Alexander Hamilton's foreign policy as exactly what was wrong. You want to be more like England? Fantastic. That's just what we need. The whole revolution was
That's
a
right.
ghastly
Didn't we
mistake.
try this before?
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And actually it was even closer than that because, Jeffersonians say, what is the most wonderful, important thing about America? It's actually our liberty, is our precious thing. And what should the goal of our foreign policy be? How about preserve American liberty at home? So let's not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, but also let's not have crony capitalists using the U.S. to promote their corporate interests overseas. Also, the more we get involved, if we try to be like England and maintain a balance of power here and do this over there, what's going to happen? Basically, a lot of people are going to hate us as a result of what we do. And when they hate us, they're going to attack us. But also, we're going to have to make all kinds of nasty allies. If we're going to assure the global oil supply, we're going to have to become best buddies with the Saudis, all these people. Plus, the government's going to be full of secrets. I mean, we can't tell people what we're doing, so everything's going to be classified, top secret. What kind of free republic is it when the average citizen can't be told what the government is doing? So these are very important ideas. They're fundamental. I mean, my point about these schools of American foreign policy is, not that there's one right one and the others are all wrong. They all stand for something very important.
No, the four of them are bigger than the sum of their parts.
Yes, exactly, right.
Yeah.
I mean, the same way, Jefferson hated parts of the way the Constitution worked. Hamilton didn't like it. if any one of the founding fathers had gotten exactly the republic he wanted, it would have been less good than the one we've got. That it's somehow the disappointment of these people has helped us have a republic that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Thank you. That's very illuminating.